This is Ahval Online, meeting point of accurate news and free comment on the current affairs of Turkey. Welcome to our podcast series.
Welcome to Turkey Trends, part of Ahval podcast series. I'm Nervana Mahmoud, and the topic today is freedom of thought and Islamism. The storm triggered in Turkey when the pop star diva Sezen Aksu was accused of insulting Islam may have settled, but its ramification may continue to haunt Turkey for quite some time. To discuss that further, it's a pleasure and honor to welcome Professor Gökhan Bacık, Professor of Political Science at the Palaki University in the Czech Republic. Professor Bacık, it's a pleasure to have you today.
Many thanks, my pleasure.
The political aspect of the storm it has been discussed thoroughly, but I am interested today into the religious aspect of things. So the concept of freedoms of thoughts versus in Islamism or in Islam is a little bit interesting, and I know that you had a discussion with Ahval in Turkish about it. There are groups who tried to claim that the insulting Adam or criticizing Adam is okay in Islam. Is that correct?
Yeah, that is correct. Yes.
Right. So there is two groups. If I am just to clarify to my audience, the pro-government group who said that Prophet Adam is a prophet and should not be insulted, but there are other group who said no. Can you elaborate further?
Yeah, sure. First of all, we should know that Erdogan heavily dominates also Islamic politics in Turkey. So he has several hats. He is the president of Turkey. He's the head of AKP, the ruling party, but also he's the de facto leader of a large league of Islamic groups. But despite so, there are some groups which somehow tries to protect their, if I may say, autonomy against Erdogan. So those groups, when they face problems, problems about religion, interpretation of religion, in the case of this diva Sezen Aksu, they are trying to challenge Erdogan by religious arguments. And interestingly, sometimes also seculars join this, because even the Kemalists, at least some of them, believe that given Turkish people are now very religious, it might be better to challenge Erdogan by using religious arguments. So when Sezen Aksu was blamed for, let's say, denigrating prophet or just, a kind of blasphemy, reminding some examples like in Malaysia, those groups argue that in terms of Islamic perspective, it's not something that we should be angry about, that because Quran even describes ordinary people as well as prophets as ignorant. So this is a way, I think, which is developing in Turkey to challenge Erdogan in religious realm, because he heavily dominates this realm.
Right. How popular are those groups, and do they belong to political parties, or no, they are completely independent?
Well, I should say that, first of all, there are still some Islamic groups. It is very difficult to measure. I should say that statistically, even pro-Erdogan Islamic groups are very small in terms of statistics. So we shouldn't imagine Turkey where Islamic groups are having a lot of demographic leverage, never. But the problem is they have a huge capacity to, let's say, legitimize or manipulate Islam. So even the biggest, the largest pro or anti-Islamic group in Turkey is demographically very small. So it's very difficult to speculate on that. But still we have some groups. Let me give some examples, such as Nurcu Group Yeni Asya, for example, is critical of Erdogan. Or despite it's oppressed heavily, Gülen movement has some kind of social basis in Turkey. Also, we have intellectuals, independent intellectuals, such as İlhami Güler, historicists, or let's say modernists, who are critical of Erdogan's way of interpreting Islam. And also, I should add, even the Kemalist party, Republican People's Party, if I may say, since 2019, is using religious arguments even to challenge Erdogan. So in this case, we have quite interesting example where seculars, because this has its origin in the belief that to challenge Erdogan, we should for a while pause secular argumentation, because it's not possible to persuade religious people on religion by using secular arguments. So paradoxically, we have even the Kemalist groups, secular groups, using extensively religious arguments on this case. But going back to your question, it's very difficult to know their size in terms of demography, but I should say that Islamic groups are mainly important for they dominate the narrative rather than their demographic leverage impact.
Right. I relate to that point, and I found it fascinating because in my native country, Egypt, there is also the same argument that we should not debate any religious group based on secular ideas, and we should just try to find a religious basis for it. But before we move on, is those independent intellectuals who are critical of Erdogan, the Kemalists who are trying to debate, do you think the ordinary Turks are responsive to them, or no?
You mean the anti-Erdogan group?
Yes. Yes.
Well, here's the point. Turkey is a divided society. Okay,
right.
And every time we have two, if I may metaphorically speak, active volcano in Turkey. One is Islam versus secularism. The other is Kurdish versus Turkish nationalism. And Erdogan is the master of surfing over them. So he always wants Kurdish issue and Islam part of politics, as we call it, cultural politics. And he, as I call him, he's the master of manipulating religion, nationalism together on Kurdish issue against secular, so on and so forth. So, and in this regard, Turkish society is divided. So those groups who support Erdogan are ready to buy the arguments, okay? But critical groups, of course, are not happy with this. So they are more close to, let's say, alternative interpretation of Islam. Another factor is even among, let's say, families, pro-AKP families, we have a new small group, but very, very interesting, let's say, among new urban groups, young people who are somehow bored with this traditional narrative of Islam. So one reason why Erdogan gave up, a step back on this diva, Sezen Aksu, he clarified his position saying that he was not directly targeting Sezen Aksu.
Yes,
I think it was mainly even among AKP supporters, among young people, young voters, there is a kind of now growing criticism against Sunni Islam in Turkey. I could say that we should wait to understand its impact in the long term. This is the first time we see Sunni Islam is in defending itself. There is a growing intellectual criticism on Sunni Islam because it's very much pro-government. It's silent on human rights abuses. It's silent on labor rights. It's silent on, let's say, gender problems. But it is acting, Sunni scholars are acting, so they are blamed for that, just to legitimize Islamist politics, mainly the government. So I think it's growing right now. For the first time, I could say that in modern Turkish history, we see Sunnism is under heavy criticism.
That's fascinating, because partially, not all, I read your book about resistance of modernity in Turkey. So you say, I saw the opposite. Initially, there was pro-modernity, and now there is resistance of modernity. But your book had changed my concept. Clearly, there was this resistance before, but now you're saying for me, if I understood you correctly, that there are people who fed up with all this, and they are, saying that we had enough from this Sunni Islam pushing into politics. Is that correct?
Yeah, but as I said, it's just like as the society divided. So you see this new understanding among, if I may say, anti-AKP. So in this regard, I can describe Turkey. Religious groups are becoming Salafi, okay? But anti-AKP groups, which were once Sunni, are becoming critical of Sunnism. So both groups are going to different directions. So Erdogan's strategy is to maximize Islamization, if I may say. So Erdogan is pushing the, in this Turkish perspective, the Salafi card, okay? So people are becoming much more radical. So compared 10 years ago, we see much more Salafi discourse in Turkish mosques right now. But on the other hand, the other groups are gradually abandoning this traditional Sunni narrative. They don't find it morally correct. They don't find it, let's say, even epistemologically correct. So we see more intellectuals, more Sunni scholars, former Sunni scholars writing, speaking against traditional Sunnism. But it's not to mean all society are changing. No, as I said previously, Erdogan is quite successful to, let's say, radicalize the Sunni groups who follows him. But on the other hand, the picture is quite different, on the contrary, in other groups. So yeah, I mean, we have some people right now in Turkey who are becoming much more critical. The reason is, from that perspective, the reason why we have authoritarianism in Turkey, why we have corruption in Turkey, is not only about actors, but because actors are practicing Sunnism. So they see those groups, those intellectuals. I gave some of their names, such as İlhami Güler, Mustafa Öztürk, so many others, or Mustafa İslamoğlu. These are leading public Islamic intellectuals. Their main argumentation is that Turkey has a lot of problems under Erdogan because he is practicing Sunnism. So Sunnism is presented to Turkish public as the paradigmatic origin of problems. So if you keep doing according to Sunni Islam, then you're going to have problems, because Sunni Islam has no capacity to criticize government historically. Sunni Islam has no capacity to propagate morality in business ethics for it. It's just morality based on rituals, going to mosque, praying, fasting.
Absolutely.
So this is quite interesting in this regard, I would say so.
How do you see this rise of Sunnism or Salafism linked to the expansion of Erdogan's sphere of interest into the Arab world? Do you think that because Erdogan involved in countries like Syria, this influence increased, or it happened organically from within Turkey, from within his support groups?
Well, there are 2 points here. First of all, we should know that Islamism in Turkey is a copy of Islamism from Egypt. Many people don't get it. So Sayyid Qutb was translated. So if you read any Islamic groups, Sayyid Qutb is the hero for Erdogan, for Fethullah Gülen, for any group. So Islamism is not an original Turkish paradigm in the Turkish case. I mean, especially after 60s and 70s, Islamism in Turkey is growing in the direction as we know it from Egypt or another Islamic, let's say, group. That's why it's not surprising to see Erdogan is very close to Muslim Brotherhood.
No.
The second point, Erdogan is not inventing any religious interpretation. It's Sunnism. So, for example, amputation, okay, chopping hand is practiced in Afghanistan, in Iran. It's not practiced in Turkey, not because Sunni ulama changed their mind. If you go to Turkey, if you buy a book of catechism, even from official Diyanet, Religious Directorate of Religious Affairs, you see Sunni Islam in Turkey also recognize chopping hand. But it's not practiced thanks to Ottoman modernization and thanks to Kemalism, because Turkey is not Sharia state. So it's not because Turkish Islam, it's not because Turkish Sunni ulama changed mind, make any ijtihad, new reasoning, and gave up amputation. No, if you buy a catechist book in Turkey, you see polygamy is still part of Islam, but they're not practiced. So I don't think Erdogan is introducing any Islamic interpretation. He is just revitalizing, if I may use the Sunni theology, Sunni fiqh, which was in this sense sleeping in Turkey. So it's on the one hand, yes, linked to Islamic world, but on the other hand, behind the Kemalist practice, behind the Turkish modernization, what we know as Sunni Islam in Turkey was very much like as it is practiced in Egypt, as it's practiced in Iran.
Okay, this is again fascinating and intriguing, because someone from the Arab world we have completely different, understanding of how the evolution of Islamism in Turkey. So thanks for clarifying this to me. But you mentioned Diyanet, and again, in your books, and I gone through some of them in the last few days, you mentioned that the one in charge of religious teaching, there is the Ministry of Education and there is the Diyanet. Can you elaborate more about who control the public narrative or the public understanding of religion in Turkey, and how it changed after Erdogan?
Yeah, first of all, there are three main groups, actors, if I may call. One is the Director of Religious Affairs. In Turkish, this is Diyanet. Diyanet is a constitutional institution. So the imams are paid by the budget, by the government.
Yep.
In this regard, Diyanet is the contemporary reincarnation of the historical state ulema alliance we know since 13th century. So this was the same during Ottoman Empire, Selçuklu Empire, and also the Kemalist Republic want religion to serve state. So in the Turkish case, we have state and religion always cooperating. They are just like twins. The second is National Ministry of Education, because again, constitutionally, we have compulsory religious courses in Turkey. So if you are a student in Turkey in upper secondary school and high school, you get religious course. This is compulsory, despite some decisions by European Court of Human Rights. And the third is Islamic organizations, the tarikats, the orders. So they all dominate Islamic socialization in Turkey. And in that regard, I think what they present to Turkey is not different what we know as Sunni Islam in any other country, take Emirates or Egypt or even Afghanistan or in Iran. So these three groups are the historical agent of Sunni Islam. There's one point here. Since they are supported by state, in the case of Diyanet and Ministry of National Education, Ministry of Education, plus, historically speaking, the Sunni Islamic groups are always state-friendly. Sunnism is a state-friendly religion. You never have a, let's say, anti or a kind of opposition movement among Sunni groups, which means Sunnism dominates Turkey, not because it is intellectually correct, not because it is intellectually fascinating, it has power. So it's not technically possible to challenge intellectually in Turkey. If you challenge Sunnism, it is practically to challenge state. So it is practically to challenge state power behind Sunnism. So virtually speaking, Sunnism destroys its opponents. It's mainly because thanks to that alliance of state and Sunnism historically, which traces back to, let's say, 13th and 14th century. So to summarize, we have three main groups, the Diyanet, the Directorate of Religious Affairs, which is very well organized. It employs probably almost 120,000 people across Turkey, plus Ministry of Education, and we have volunteer, which are Islamic organizations, but they are just repeating the same Sunni mentality. And historically, you can imagine them as volunteer, let's say, partner of state, because Sunnism in the Turkish case is theory of loyalty, is theory of subjugation.
Well, thank you for highlighting that. And I'm still stunned by the remarkable similarity of the course of Sunnism in Turkey with that in Egypt. There is huge similarities. But now, which leave me with the last question, you clearly said that challenging Sunnism or the religious authorities with all their three parts is challenging the state. That's why there are no reformation of sorts in Turkey, if I understand correct. But can you highlight, there are any reformers now? I am aware of historically the 19th century Ottomanism and how there was a lot of efforts to reform the thoughts of Islam and how there was a lot of intellectuals at that time. But what about modern time now? Any reformers, and I'm not saying academic, I'm saying people who managed to gauge the public.
Well, first of all, I should clarify. I agree with you. Historically, there are always people in Turkey since late Ottoman Empire that talking about not maybe reform, but reviving Islam. But, well, as a scholar who studied on them, for me, none of them was a reformist. I mean,
Right.
they were, for them, the theory was perfect. So the problem about Muslims. So what they were doing practically in the name of reviving is not reviving. It's just like, let's say, polishing the theory. So in that modern understanding, I think the idea of reform is quite new in Turkey. So we have probably first scholars, maybe in after 50s or 60s, and mainly after we have the first faculty of theology, part of Ankara University. So graduate of that faculty, because they were educated also according to modern methodology, developed new perspectives on Islam, which can be, let's say, labeled, which deserve to be labeled as truly modernist, or reformist. For example, in 1979, Fazlur Rahman, the great reformist, visited that university. So we have names such as Said Hatipoğlu, Hüseyin Atay, and their students. So Turkey now has a very strong tradition of reformists. They publish books, they act as a public intellectuals, but the problem is, as I said, and as you emphasize in your question, Sunnism reproduces itself not through intellectual perspective, through socialization. So imagine you happen to born in a Turkish village, you go to mosque, you go to school, and that's all about Sunni Islam. So the penetration capacity of reformists in Turkey are very limited, because Sunnism reproduces itself not through intellectual engagement, but through socialization. So you get it as a habit. You just take it as part of a natural part of your life. Maybe at university, maybe later, you engage some intellectuals who criticize Sunnism. Otherwise, it's completely a natural part of Turkish socialization. That's why Turkey now has a very strong intellectual tradition of reformists, but their penetration capacity is highly limited.
Professor Bacık, thank you for discussing this with me. And I'm afraid my summary from all this, that we all are struggling from the same things. We need reformers to penetrate societies more. We need to stop the government control support of literalism and ritualism if we really want to progress to modern societies. I hope Turkey will emerge better than Egypt in that aspect, but I thank you very much for the time, and let's hope for a better future. Thank you very much.
Completely agree. My pleasure. My pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Can I just turn
You can follow Ahval News Online podcast series through Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, Google Podcasts, SoundCloud, and Spreaker. All you need to know about Turkey is here, for your ears, mind, and attention. Thank you for listening to our podcast.